Land surveyors do not measure the earth because we believe it is orderly. We measure it because it is not. Rivers move. Roads curve around property lines. Mountains make a straight mile impossible. The instruments reduce that disorder to coordinates, bearings, elevations, and a confidence interval. When our work is finished, two people can stand miles apart and agree where one thing ends and another begins. I trusted that agreement for 14 years. Then I was assigned to a hiking trail that had begun adding 1 new mile every night. The trail was called Alder Wren. It formed a loop through the western side of Bellwether National Forest, beginning and ending at a single gate. The official distance was 12.4 miles. That number appeared on recreation maps, rescue plans, funding reports, and a wooden sign at the trailhead. It had not changed since the route was surveyed in 1937. The first complaint came from a runner whose watch recorded 13.4 miles. The district assumed he had left the trail. A week later, 3 hikers recorded 14.4. Their GPS tracks followed the official route exactly, but the geometry contained 2 additional straight miles that did not fit inside the valley. By the time I arrived, a woman was missing and Alder Wren measured 18 miles on every device carried through it. My name is Samuel Calder. I am a licensed professional surveyor. What follows is the field account I submitted to the Forest District, without the changes their attorneys later requested. The Bellwether Survey Office occupied a timber building above the town of Renfall. District Ranger Anya Voss met me there on a Monday afternoon in October. She had covered the main drafting table with maps and printed GPS tracks. The official trail looked like a bent oval around Mount Harker's lower watershed. It climbed from the trailhead to a ridge, crossed 2 creeks, passed a fire lookout foundation, and returned through an old cedar grove. 12.4 miles was reasonable for the terrain. The visitor tracks were not. Each one followed the oval until a location west of Alder Creek. There, the line extended into a narrow loop 1 mile long before rejoining the trail at the same coordinate. On the next night's track, there were 2 loops, then 3. They appeared on top of one another because the GPS reported identical latitude and longitude for each. But the timestamps showed hikers spending between 18 and 24 minutes inside every loop. Their watches counted the distance. Their photographs showed terrain that did not exist on the map. Anya spread 12 photographs across the table. One showed a stone marker beside the trail. Its face had been cut smooth, but no number was carved into it. Another showed a straight path crossing what should have been a 400-foot ravine. The ground under the path was supported by the roots of tall trees growing in 2 parallel rows. In a third photograph, a wooden ranger cabin stood in a clearing where satellite images showed uninterrupted forest. I asked whether the pictures had been verified. Different phones, different hikers, Anya said. Metadata is intact. None of them knew each other. She gave me the missing woman's name. Maren Cole, age 32. She entered Alder Wren alone 9 days earlier. A parking lot camera recorded her at 7:14 in the morning. At 2:06 that afternoon, she sent a photograph to her sister showing a stone marker with the number 17 scratched into its face. There was no mile 17. Her final message said the trail kept returning her to the same cabin. Search teams worked for 6 days. They walked the official loop, cut cross-country lines, flew thermal cameras, and searched both creeks. Every team reported a different total distance. One canine unit traveled 21 miles without leaving the 12-mile loop. The dog became exhausted and refused to face west after reaching Alder Creek. The district closed the trail. The next morning, The wooden gate was 1 mile farther from the parking area than it had been the night before. Anya pointed through the office windows toward the darkening forest. "I don't need you to explain why," she said. "I need one distance that stays true long enough for us to find Marin." I told her survey errors often repeat. Dense trees block satellites and cause a GPS receiver to reuse old positions. Consumer Watches estimate distance between bad fixes and can add mileage. The overlapping loops might be the same section recorded with false coordinates. The photographs were harder to dismiss, but not impossible. Search fatigue alters memory. People share rumors. Once a ranger cabin enters the story, every hunting shed starts to look like evidence. Anya listened without interrupting. Then she showed me a survey control map from 1937. The original crew had measured Alder Wren with a steel chain, a transit, and elevation levels. Every straight segment was listed in a field ledger. The bearings formed a closed traverse. The final line returned to the starting monument with an error of less than 1 foot. Except the arithmetic did not close. I checked it twice. The listed segments totaled 11.4 miles, not 12.4. Someone had added exactly 5,280 feet to the final distance without assigning that mile to any bearing. In survey terms, the trail contained 1 mile with no direction. Anya asked whether that explained the modern tracks. I said it explained why the 1937 map should never have been certified. My field technician arrived the next morning. Her name was Lena Ortiz. She had worked with me for 6 years and possessed the useful habit of distrusting equipment before distrusting herself. We brought 2 survey-grade satellite receivers, a robotic total station, an electronic distance meter, a calibrated measuring wheel, and enough control markers to establish a permanent traverse. Anya assigned a ranger named Curtis Hale to accompany us. Curtis had led 2 of the searches for Marin. He carried rescue gear, a satellite radio, and a folded copy of the official trail map in a clear case. At 7:30, we drove to the Alder Wren Trailhead. The parking turnout was empty. Rain shone on the gravel. A locked gate stood across the access road, and beyond it a narrow path disappeared between cedars. The information board listed the trail at 12.4 miles. Someone had drawn a black line through the number and written 18 beneath it. Curtis said the board had been cleaned the previous afternoon. I established our first control point in the parking lot by driving an aluminum monument below the frost line. Lena set the base receiver above it and began collecting satellite observations. We would keep that receiver fixed while a second unit traveled with us. If canopy interference affected the moving receiver, the base data would correct it later. I also marked the gate with a reflective target and measured its distance from the parking monument using the total station. 211.3 feet. Curtis stared at the display. He said the gate had been less than 40 feet from the parking lot when he locked it. The gravel between us and the gate looked ordinary. It did not curve or descend. A person standing at one end could clearly see the other. I checked the instrument constant, temperature, air pressure, and prism setting. The distance remained 211 feet. Lena used the measuring wheel. She reached the gate after 38 feet. From the gate, she called that the total station appeared to be more than 200 feet away. I could still see her at what looked like an ordinary walking distance. But the instrument focused at 211. We switched places. When I walked toward the gate, the first 30 feet felt normal. Then my next step lasted too long. There was no falling sensation. The ground did not move. I placed my boot forward and watched it approach the gravel as if viewed through the wrong end of a telescope. Rain hung beside me in long silver threads. Lena's face became distant while remaining the same apparent size. My foot landed. I was standing beside her at the gate. The measuring wheel had advanced 38 feet. My receiver said I had traveled 211. Curtis asked which number was real. I said both instruments had passed calibration. It was the first time in my career that I answered a distance question by describing the tools. We began the trail traverse at 8:12. For the first 6 miles, Alder Wren behaved like an ordinary route. We occupied the original stone control points, recorded bearings, and checked elevations. The old cruise measurements were remarkably accurate. Trees had fallen and switchbacks had eroded, but our running total remained within 12 feet of the 1937 ledger. At mile 6.8, we reached Alder Creek. A modern footbridge crossed the water. On the far side, the trail divided around a cedar and rejoined itself. The distance between those points was 84 feet. Our GPS track showed 1 mile. I set the total station at the first junction and aimed through the trees. Lena held the prism at the second. The instrument returned a distance of 5,284 feet. I could see Lena clearly. She was 84 feet away. I made her move the prism 1 foot closer. The reading decreased by 1 foot. She moved 10 feet. It decreased by 10. The extra mile remained constant, inserted between 2 points that had not moved. Curtis used the radio to report our position. The district dispatcher said our signal appeared to originate from 4 separate locations, all with the same coordinates. On the west side of the cedar, we found a stone marker. It was waist-high, rectangular, and covered in moss except for one smooth face. A single number had been carved into it. 13. The cut was fresh. Pale stone dust still clung to the groove. Marin's photograph had shown the same marker blank 9 days earlier. Curtis searched the surrounding ground and found a strip of blue fabric caught on a fern. Marin had worn a blue rain jacket. The fabric was dry despite the rain. We called her name. Somebody answered from farther along the trail. The voice was faint and indistinct, but Curtis heard it too. We moved west, marking our route every 100 feet with orange flagging. After a quarter mile, we passed the same cedar again. The marker now displayed 14. Our flags continued beyond it in both directions. Lena counted them. We had placed 16. 32 were visible. Every flag had my company initials written on it in black marker. The second set was weathered. Moss had grown over the wire stems. One strip crumbled when Lena touched it. We had been on the trail for less than 5 hours. Curtis called Marin again. This time, the answer came from behind us. It used his voice. We returned to the trailhead before dark. I expected the closed traverse to expose a gross error. Instead, the bearings returned to the parking monument within 2 inches. The total distance was 13.4 miles. The trail had acquired exactly 1 mile since the official survey, and the extra length had no direction, elevation, or area. It existed only when traveled between 2 adjacent points. I downloaded the data at the regional office. Our map looked normal. The extra mile collapsed into a single coordinate at Alder Creek. At 11:58 that night, the software created a new line without input. It extended from the Alder Creek coordinate into the blank margin of the map. The line was perfectly straight and exactly 1 mile long. At midnight, it turned back and rejoined the same point. The project total updated to 14.4 miles. I called Anya and told her not to send another team onto the trail. While we spoke, the base receiver in the parking lot uploaded its next observation. The gate was now 5,491 feet from our control monument, 1 mile farther than it had been that morning. The rational decision was to remove our equipment, close the site, and wait for a larger response. The problem was Marin. We had found fabric from her jacket and heard a voice on the added segment. Whatever Alder Wren was doing, she had entered it alive. If the trail grew by 1 mile every night, waiting would place her farther away. I proposed an overnight baseline survey. We would install 2 fixed instruments on opposite sides of the Alder Creek anomaly and observe the distance continuously through midnight. A trail can deceive a moving person more easily than it can deceive simultaneous measurements. If the extra length developed at a specific time, we would record how. Anya approved one night. She made me promise that if the instruments disagreed, we would abandon them and leave. The next morning, the parking monument stood where we had placed it. The gate looked 40 feet away. The total station measured 1 mile and 211 feet. Crossing that distance required a single ordinary walk. My watch recorded 23 minutes, although I experienced less than one. Lena's video showed me taking thousands of steps without moving faster. On the image, my body blurred into a vertical smear that stretched between the parking lot and the gate. Curtis refused to watch it twice. The trail's new total was 14.4 miles. The added distance remained concentrated west of Alder Creek. We reached the site before noon and established the baseline. I mounted the robotic total station on bedrock east of the cedar. Lena placed a prism and a second receiver on bedrock west of it. We checked the distance with 3 methods. Direct line of sight, 84.1 feet. Electronic slope distance, 5,364.1. Satellite coordinates, 0 feet. According to the satellites, both instruments occupied the same point. Curtis found the stone marker 50 yards down the western path. It now showed 14. A second marker stood 1 mile beyond it, numbered 15. The second marker was older. Its edges were rounded, and the moss on its northern face was thick enough to have grown for decades. Beside it lay a modern red backpack. Marin's family confirmed the description by radio. Inside were food wrappers, a first aid kit, and her phone with a dead battery. The pack was dry. The ground beneath it held no footprints. We established camp between the 2 markers. At sunset, rain began falling through the trees. Lena connected the instruments to a rugged laptop. Every 30 seconds, the total station measured the prism, the receiver's log position, and a time-lapse camera photographed the corridor. Curtis built a small cooking shelter. He kept glancing west. I asked what he had heard during the previous searches. He said the first team found the trail at its expected length. On the second day, they passed a group of hikers carrying wooden frame packs. The hikers wore canvas jackets and broad hats. They did not answer questions. When the team looked back, the group was walking the same direction but receding as if headed away. On the third day, searchers found mile markers 16 through 19. Each stood beside a different kind of path. One resembled a logging road. One had railroad ties under the mud. Another was paved with flat stones worn smooth by feet. None appeared on satellite imagery. Curtis had omitted those details from the incident report because the district psychologist told him the team was sharing a stress response. Was that before or after your GPS tracks came back 20 miles long? Lena asked. Before, he said. After that, they stopped asking us what we saw. At 11:30, the total station began losing the prism. The target was visible in the camera. Its reflective center remained sharp, but the instrument's return signal weakened as if the beam were crossing miles of rain. The measured distance increased by 1 foot every 30 seconds. At that rate, the new mile would take 44 hours to form. Then the interval accelerated. 10 feet per reading. 50. 100. The prism still stood 84 feet away. At 11:53, the camera image changed. The two trees flanking the trail were copied farther apart. A second pair appeared between them, identical down to broken limbs and patches of moss. Then a third pair formed. The ground beneath each set repeated the same exposed root and puddle. We watched the path reproduce itself in sections. The corridor lengthened without pushing either endpoint through the forest. Each new piece occupied the same physical space as the first, layered where our eyes could not separate it. The total station measured all of them. At midnight, the distance stopped increasing. 5,280 feet had been added. The stone marker beside our camp made a grinding sound. We aimed our lights at it. The number 15 remained on the face. A narrow line appeared beneath it. Pale dust spilled down the moss as an unseen edge carved a second digit. The marker now read 16. From the darkness west of camp came the sound of metal links being pulled across stone. It moved slowly toward us. Curtis raised his voice and asked who was there. The dragging stopped. A woman answered. "Are you at the cabin?" Curtis called Marin's name. She said yes. Her voice came through the trees from several directions, repeating the answer a fraction of a second apart. The nearest copy sounded less than 50 feet away. The farthest echoed from a distance no forest valley could contain. We took lights, medical gear, and a safety line. I left the GPS receivers operating, but carried no navigation device. The added corridor ran west. We followed it. After the first half-mile, our own camp appeared ahead. The tent, table, and glowing laptop stood between the trees. 3 people were seated under the shelter with their backs to us. Curtis whispered that we had looped. Lena pointed behind us. Our real camp remained visible through the rain. The duplicate was not a reflection. Its fire produced heat. Water dripped from the tent. On the laptop, a map line extended across a dark screen. The seated figures wore our jackets. The one in my chair turned its head slightly. I pulled the safety line and made the others keep moving. We passed the camp without looking at the faces. The 3 figures remained still until we were beyond the firelight. Then footsteps began following us at exactly our pace. At the next mile marker, the trail crossed a ravine. There was no bridge. Trees grew from the empty air below the path, their roots woven into a narrow shelf of soil. Each trunk repeated at regular intervals. The same tree copied hundreds of times across the gap. Our orange flag stood beside them, old and new, continuing into fog. The dragging chains sounded beneath us. Halfway across, the safety line became heavy. I looked back. It extended into the fog toward Curtis and Lena, then continued behind them to 3 additional figures holding the same rope. Beyond those figures, more of us crossed the ravine in a diminishing line. Every version carried the rope. Every version looked back. Lena shouted for me to face forward. We ran the remaining distance. The path reached solid forest and curved into a clearing. A 1-room cedar cabin stood there with a moss-covered roof. Warm light shone through one window. Marin Cole opened the door. She was thin, dehydrated, and wearing the blue jacket from the photograph. According to her, she had been missing for 1 night. The cabin interior contained a bunk, an iron stove, a drafting table, and dozens of hand-drawn maps. Antique survey tools hung from the walls. A steel chain lay coiled on the table, each link 10 inches long. One end disappeared through a narrow slot in the floor. Marin said she found the cabin on her first afternoon. Whenever she tried to leave, The path returned her to the clearing. She slept, woke, and believed it was the next morning. Her phone showed 9 days had passed, but the stove fire never burned down and the food in her pack never decreased until she carried it outside. Every night, someone came to the porch and measured the cabin. She heard a chain laid along each wall. A man counted 80 lengths around the clearing, then drove a stake beneath her window. By morning, the trail outside was 1 mile longer. Curtis checked her vital signs. Lena examined the maps. Each sheet showed a different trail in Bellwether Forest. Some were old logging roads. Others were fire lines, rail grades, and abandoned recreation routes. Red pencil marks crossed every path. Dates beside them corresponded to closures, washouts, fires, and administrative removals. All of the red lines converged on Alder Wren. The field ledger on the drafting table belonged to Elias Wren, the surveyor who certified the trail in 1937. His first entries described an ordinary assignment. The Forest Service wanted a loop connecting a lookout, 2 creeks, and several fire access routes. Wren and a 4-man crew measured with an engineer's chain 100 feet long. On their 5th day, the chain gained an extra link. They removed it. The next morning, it had 2. By the end of the month, the chain was 1 mile longer than its certified length. Wren discovered that each new section corresponded to a road the agency had deleted from a map. A washed-out spur vanished from the district plan, and 100 feet appeared in his chain. A fire trail was abandoned, and half a mile appeared. When a logging settlement was erased from county records, its entire main road arrived link by link. He wrote that the forest did not distinguish between destroying a path and refusing to remember it. A trail recorded on a map possessed 2 endpoints and a distance between them. When officials removed the line, the land remained. The distance had nowhere to report itself. It came to the chain. Wren built the cabin to store the added links. He called it the chain house. The Alder Wren loop was designed around it as a containment survey. He deliberately left 1 mile without a bearing and distributed the excess through the official distance. That unassigned mile served as a margin. Removed roads could exist inside it without acquiring endpoints in the outside world. Hikers passed through because no monument established where the mile began or ended. The final page carried a warning in heavy pencil. Never correct the closure. If the missing mile is fixed, the stored roads will enter the traverse one at a time. Each monument will make one permanent. When the loop contains every path the forest has lost, it will begin measuring roads that have not yet been removed. Lena showed me the modern control map on her tablet. The 1937 arithmetic error was gone. 12 days earlier, the district's mapping software had automatically repaired it. An update had interpreted the missing mile as a transcription mistake and distributed 5,280 feet across the trail geometry. The digital traverse now closed perfectly. The first new mile appeared that night. Marin asked how many removed roads were stored in the chain house. We counted the maps on the walls. There were more than 400. They were not arranged by date. They were arranged by distance. The shortest routes hung nearest the stove, footpaths between farms, abandoned spurs, and small bridges removed after floods. Longer roads covered the far wall. Several sheets had been joined edge to edge because the route would not fit on one page. Objects had been pinned beneath some of them. A bus token hung below a discontinued mountain road. A corroded room key marked the path to a hotel town evacuated before a reservoir was filled. Beneath the plan of a timber railway, Wren had fastened a child's red mitten. The wool was still damp. Curtis recognized a fire access track called Quarry 9. The district closed it after a burn in 2003. Two firefighters had been driving out when a slope collapsed. Their truck was recovered, but the cab was empty and no footprints led away. Officially, the men were carried into the river. Wren's map was dated 66 years before they disappeared. Two small brass service tags were pinned to it. Curtis read the names stamped into them. They belonged to the missing firefighters. This meant the chain house did not simply collect old paths after agencies erased them. Some maps arrived before the road was built and before the people who vanished on it were born. The ledger explained that too. Wren believed an official road began disappearing when somebody first decided its future could be ignored. A line might remain on public maps for decades after funding ended, inspections stopped, and rescue responsibility became uncertain. The land recognized that abandonment before the paperwork did. Once no living person could say who was required to keep a route passable, the chain house received its distance. Maren had learned the same rule from experience. During what she thought was her first night, she marked the cabin door with a pocket knife. The next time the trail returned her to the clearing, the mark was gone. A notebook appeared on the table containing a detailed account of her attempt, written in her handwriting. She remembered none of it. She tried a different direction. The cabin took the memory of that route too. By the time we found her, 7 versions of her notebook lay beneath the bunk. Each described a different path. One followed railroad ties to a station where no train stopped. One reached a suspension bridge over a reservoir that had not existed in 1937. One found the Alder Wren gate, but the parking lot beyond it contained Maren's car covered by years of moss. The final notebook was not finished. Its last page described 4 people arriving in the rain: a ranger, a survey technician, a missing hiker, and a man carrying a pry bar. There were 4 of us in the cabin, but I had not taken out the pry bar yet. It was strapped to my field pack. The next sentence said the man would use it on the table. I stepped away from the drafting table. Nothing happened. The sentence slowly faded from the page. In its place, Maren's handwriting formed new words. He understands that a mapped route is a decision, not a prediction. Lena closed the notebook. That distinction became the only reason we escaped. The chain house showed possible lines and tried to make the observer complete one. It could extend a measured decision. It could not force us to choose an endpoint we refused to recognize. On the wall behind the bunk, I found one map that was almost blank. It showed the regional survey office in Renfall. The drafting room was outlined in pencil. A narrow trail crossed the floor and passed directly through the table where Anya had shown me the visitor tracks. Beside the office, Wren had drawn a stone marker. Its face carried no number. I removed the sheet from the wall and folded it into my coat. At the time, I believed taking it would prevent that route from being filed with the others. I had not yet learned that removing a line from a map was how every road in the cabin arrived. The dragging chain moved beneath the floor, one link at a time. The coil on the table tightened toward the slot. The other end remained hidden in the forest. Every few seconds, metal struck the underside of a floorboard as if somebody below us were pulling the chain hand over hand. Lena closed the ledger. "Our instruments are feeding it," she said. She was right. Wren's original chain only acquired links while his crew measured. The modern growth began when the mapping software corrected the trail, then accelerated after search teams filled the loop with GPS tracks. Our permanent control points had done more than observe the anomaly. They had given every impossible mile 2 surveyed ends. The laptop at camp was still uploading a corrected position every 30 seconds. So was the base receiver in the parking lot. Every observation told the district database that the extra distance was real. Curtis used the satellite radio to call Anya. The signal broke into copies of his voice. She heard his first sentence, then the same words again from different coordinates. We moved the radio near the window until one connection held. I told Anya to take the Alder Wren project offline and restore the uncorrected 1937 geometry. She said the district database did not permit an invalid closure. The software would reject any route whose endpoints failed to meet. Then do not give it endpoints, I said. Delete the route. There was a long pause. Government map data has dependencies. Removing one trail would affect maintenance orders, rescue zones, watershed plans, and public maps. Anya began listing approvals she would need. The chain struck the floor hard enough to lift the table. Marin shouted into the radio that she had been missing 9 days because somebody wanted a valid line. Anya deleted it. The maps on the cabin walls moved. Their red lines faded. New pencil lines appeared beneath them, extending beyond the edges of the paper. One crossed the map table and continued as a dark, wet mark along the wall. The digital route was gone, but our field monuments still held the physical traverse. We had to remove them. That meant returning to camp, collecting every flag point we could reach, shutting down the total station, and pulling the monument in the parking lot. We also had to bring Marin through a trail that would return her to the cabin whenever it possessed a measured distance. Elias Wren had left instructions. Lena found them scratched into the back of the ledger's wooden cover. The message was brief. Walk by what moves, never by what stays. Do not count. Do not close. Leave 1 mile unknown. A survey depends on fixed points. Creeks move. Clouds move. Sounds move. Wren had escaped the chain house by following things that could not serve as monuments. We left our GPS units in the cabin. I took only a flashlight, the safety line, and a pry bar for the monuments. Curtis carried the radio. Lena supported Marin, who could walk but tired quickly. We did not follow our compass. We did not count steps. When the trail divided, we chose the branch where rainwater flowed. When the path crossed a stream, we followed the current instead of the bank. I made myself ignore the familiar professional questions. How far? What bearing? What elevation? The forest punished every answer I almost formed. When I estimated that the camp should be 10 minutes ahead, the trees repeated and added 10 minutes. When Curtis said the ravine sounded close, the ground dropped away beneath the next patch of fog. The path listened for measurements in ordinary speech. We stopped using numbers. At a junction, 4 abandoned routes entered the clearing. The left branch was a plank road built over black water. Rusted cable brackets along its edge matched a 1950s logging tram removed after a landslide. The second branch climbed stone steps through cedars. The stones were worn at the center by generations of boots, though no historic trail appeared on district maps. The third contained narrow-gauge rails. Ferns grew between the ties, and a headlamp moved toward us far inside the tunnel of trees. The fourth looked like modern Alder Wren. Orange flags marked it. Our camp light flickered ahead. Marin moved toward that branch. She said her backpack was there. She could see it beside the marker. She had left medication inside. Curtis held her while Lena checked the duplicate pack. It was visible less than 50 feet away, but binocular focus placed it more than a mile from the clearing. The headlamp on the rail line came closer. A man walked behind it carrying a lunch pail. His clothing was soaked and covered with pale mud. Several figures followed at regular intervals. On the plank road, a truck engine started. Along the stone path, bells rang somewhere below the trees. The routes were not empty. They contained everyone who had still been traveling when the maps declared the paths gone. Curtis recognized one of the searchers from his first team standing beside our camp. The man had not disappeared. He was alive in Renfall. But this version wore the same jacket and carried the same radio. He called Curtis by name and said Marin was inside the tent. The radio on Curtis's belt repeated the message 1 second earlier. I understood the duplicate camps then. They were not copies of us from the past. They were survey outcomes. Every route our team might have taken remained available because we had measured them all. The forest preserved every possible line until a person chose which one became official. I poured water onto the ground and watched it leave the clearing. It ran between the marked branches, through brush where no trail existed. We followed it. The figures called after us. My own voice came from the camp and warned that we were leaving the search area. Lena's voice said the creek ended at a cliff. Marin's voice begged from all 4 trails. Nobody answered. The moving water led downhill. We pushed through sword ferns, climbed over deadfall, and crossed slopes too steep for a maintained route. The terrain changed beneath our feet. Gravel became old pavement for a few steps, then railroad ballast, then cedar needles. Removed roads tried to align themselves with our direction. Whenever a straight corridor opened, I turned away from it. We reached Alder Creek without finding the ravine. The current flowed east. We followed it until we heard the faint electrical buzz of the total station searching for its prism. Our real camp stood on the opposite bank. The duplicate camp was gone. The laptop remained on the table, drawing a stack of loops at the same coordinate. Its project total changed each time the screen refreshed. 18 miles. 19. 20. The software had continued measuring after the digital route was deleted. At the center of the map, a new label appeared. Chain house control. Lena shut down the program. It restarted. She removed the battery. The screen remained lit. I folded the laptop closed and struck the storage drive with the pry bar. The screen finally went black. The total station stopped moving. Across the creek, its prism stood at the western endpoint. Behind it, the forest corridor had become a straight ridge no wider than the trail. Identical trees rose on both sides. The ground fell into darkness beyond them. I pulled the total station from its tripod. Lena dismantled the prism. We removed the reference nails from the bedrock and collected our flags without counting them. Each time a marker came out, the trail shifted. Trees that had been separated snapped back into one position without moving through the space between. Puddles merged. The camp tent appeared closer to the creek. From far down the corridor came a sequence of impacts as numbered stone markers fell onto their faces. The chain house light went out. Marin felt the change immediately. She said the cabin was no longer behind us. For the first time since we found her, she could remember what direction the trailhead lay. We packed nothing that had not existed before the survey. Food, shelter, and medical supplies came with us. Duplicate flags, extra rope, and an old steel chain segment remained on the ground. At dawn, we began following Alder Creek east. The satellite radio worked intermittently. Anya had restored a scanned image of Wren's original map without converting it into modern line work. On paper, the trail again contained 1 mile without a direction, but the parking control monument still fixed the loop's starting point. Until I pulled it, the added miles could not collapse completely. The creek should have passed within half a mile of the trailhead. I am using that number because it appears on the old map. I did not measure it that morning. We walked for hours. The forest brightened, but the sky never became visible. Removed paths crossed our route at increasing intervals. A fire road ended at one bank and resumed on the other without a bridge. Concrete curbs appeared beneath moss. Telephone poles stood in a line through trees older than the utility company that placed them. We began seeing numbered markers again. 19, 20, 21. We did not approach them. Their blank rear faces turned toward us as we passed, as if each stone were rotating inside the ground. At noon, we reached a locked wooden gate. Our truck stood beyond it in the parking lot. Curtis nearly opened the latch before I saw the problem. The information board was on the wrong side. The light pole leaned left instead of right. Our base receiver was missing from the control monument. This was a version of the trailhead formed from our memory. Behind us, through the trees, a second gate appeared. It looked correct. The truck's license plate matched. The base receiver blinked above its monument. The radio came alive with Anya's voice. She said she could see us on the parking camera standing beyond the first gate. Curtis asked which gate she meant. Her answer came from both directions. The only gate. Each trailhead was equally complete because we had surveyed the line between them. One represented the loop's start. The other represented its end. A closed traverse required them to be the same point. If we chose either, we would complete the survey. I put the pry bar down. I removed my watch, compass, and the folded map from my pockets. Lena did the same. Curtis switched off the radio. We left every object that could tell us where we were. Then we walked between the gates. There was no trail there. We pushed through salal and young firs, moving neither toward nor away from the parking lot. I chose each step by the nearest patch of open ground. We did not look back. We did not describe how long it took. Eventually, we heard rain striking the metal roof of the real truck. We emerged from brush beside the parking area. Only one gate remained. The base receiver stood over my control monument. Its display showed 412 stored observations. Every one reported the same coordinates. The instrument had not moved. I removed the receiver and dug around the monument. The aluminum rod should have extended 3 feet into compacted gravel. It continued beyond the reach of my shovel. I attached the truck winch and began pulling. Section after section emerged from the ground. The monument had grown downward by the same amount the trail grew outward. Polished aluminum slid from the hole for what felt like minutes, then hours. Joints appeared where no joints existed. Each one bore a number. 13, 14, 15, 16. The line tightened. Somewhere in the forest, metal links answered. I stopped looking at the rod. I kept the winch running until the end tore free. The world lost a mile. There was no visible collapse. The rain simply arrived 1 second earlier. The gate stood beside the parking lot. A slope I had mistaken for distant moved into the foreground. My ears popped as if the air pressure had changed. Marin fell to her knees. The truck clock advanced 9 days. Anya came through the gate with a rescue team. She had watched us emerge from the brush less than 30 feet from the parking lot. On the camera, we had been visible for 6 hours, walking in place while the forest moved behind us. The team took Marin to the hospital. She recovered. Curtis resigned at the end of the season. Lena still works in surveying, but she refuses projects that use automatic closure adjustment. I returned to Alder Wren once, 3 weeks later. The district had removed the gate, the information board, and every sign that gave the trail a distance. Crews covered the first section with fallen branches. The public map showed an unmarked green area. Search plans referred to landmarks and drainage basins instead of route mileage. I did not enter. From the parking lot, I could see an unnumbered stone marker between the trees. It was the same one from Marin's first photograph. The trail remained closed for 2 years. No hikers disappeared. No GPS tracks formed at Alder Creek. The chain house did not appear in aerial surveys. Then the district moved its records to a new national mapping system. The import process found an invalid geometry in the archived 1937 file. An automated repair closed the traverse. I received the error notice at 11:58 p.m. I called Anya, but her old number had been reassigned. I logged into the project and tried to delete the route. The system said the feature was already in use by another map. At midnight, something struck the floor beneath my office. A stone marker pushed through the boards beside the drafting table. Wet soil spread from its base. Ferns unfolded in the light from my computer screen. A narrow strip of trail formed across the room, entered one wall, and continued out through another without damaging either. The marker's face displayed the number 22. My GPS receiver powered on inside its case. It recorded a control point at the center of the office, then a second point at the same coordinates. The distance between them was exactly 1 mile. Every night since then, the trail across the floor has grown a little longer. It does not take up more space. The office door still appears 10 steps away. But if I walk toward it after midnight, my receiver counts thousands of feet. I no longer keep maps in the building. I no longer answer when someone asks how far away I am. And I will not tell you the current length of the Alder Wren Trail. A distance becomes permanent when enough people agree on it. You have been listening to the Ashen Frequency. This account is an original work of fiction. If a familiar trail ever feels longer on the way home, do not mark the place where you noticed. The forest may only be waiting for an endpoint.